Oh. And of course, if you don't want to be recorded asking a question, that's what the chat box is for. I won't name names there. All right. First of all, thank you all so much for coming. My name is Shelby Gai. I am an assistant professor in the management department at Michigan State University. I am delighted to have the opportunity to share some advice and tips that I've picked up over the years in terms of how to give a better job talk presentation, both from my experience as a job candidate, as well as from the other side of the room, right, as a faculty member assessing some of these. One of the things that I've noticed is that schools vary a lot in terms of how much training they give PhD students and how much help they give, especially during the job talk. And we get trained on a lot of things, but how to give that job talk is oftentimes not one of them, and it often is sort of the most important talk of your life, right? So to the extent that this presentation can be helpful, I hope that this will be a net positive essentially going forward. That being said, I have some very important caveats that I want to make sure everyone's aware of, right? This presentation, this Zoom presentation will not guarantee a successful job talk, right? I'm not saying that if you follow everything that I've laid out here, that you will 100% rock your job talk, and definitely not 100% get any job that you apply for, right? Important caveat, no guarantees here, just some tips and advice there. In addition to this, the presentation offers tips and suggestions. It's not offering any absolute rules. If anyone tells you that there's a quote unquote right way to do a presentation, they're lying to you, okay? There is no one right way to do it. Adopt and adapt as best as you think and use your own discretion, but by no means is this meant to be hard and fast rules. Also, this presentation is on giving a presentation, right? Not on slide design. I have been told that my slides are ugly. I accept that they are not designer slides, right? They are not like the McKinsey sleek slides that you can often see. That's okay, right? I'm focusing on how you can raise sort of the floor of your presentation to make it so that you have clarity in your job talk, right? And so that it appeals to sort of the broad masses there. Not looking for beauty, but I'm looking for sort of getting the basics correct. And the final thing is that this presentation will not substitute for practice. Do not think that just because you've adapted these tips into how you designed your presentation, that all of a sudden that's going to speak for itself. You're going to be the one who's delivering this. You're going to be the one who's talking through the presentation. So there's no substitute for practice. You can have everything perfect in the PowerPoint, but if you don't practice and work on making sure that essentially that you're comfortable giving it, it doesn't matter if the foundation's there, right? The tower's it's not going to stand steady. Okay, so with that, here are the goals for today's presentation. I'm going to start off by sort of laying the groundwork for the science of presenting, just some basic behavioral considerations that I don't think a lot of us know about, quite frankly, before we're sort of on the other side and experiencing it for the first time. But I'm going to spend the bulk majority of the time talking about the art of presenting, sort of like the different types of tips and suggestions, right, essentially to help you not just communicate your ideas, but communicate them in an effective manner. And in addition to that, I'm really going to be focusing on academic talks, right? Addressing the assumptions and giving you some clear sort of takeaways for how you can design your presentation to make it more effective. And if time allows, I'll try to give some final bits of advice. You'll see that in the course of the presentation, it goes from like, science, right? A lot of confidence there to more like soft opinions of my own. And so I just wanted to make sure that, again, take what you will from this presentation. It's meant to help. It's meant to sort of provide some advice. It's not meant to be hard rules in that way. Okay, so let's get started with the science of presenting. The three things that I'm going to be talking about here are sort of some of the psychological barriers that you need to keep in consideration when you're giving job talks, as well as some of the behavioral limitations that come about due to some of the slides. And there are also some very important caveats going forward. So let's start with psychological biases. I'm a strategy scholar, not an OB scholar, but at the same time, so if I don't present these psychological biases in like the purest form, right, you'll have to forgive me. But these are two things that I found really helpful when I'm giving a presentation, right? So there's the first part, that's the illusion of transparency, which is basically how much do you think you understand, right? Your thoughts and emotions versus how much the other person, right, your audience, some random stranger, whatever, your friend, right? How much they actually understand your thoughts and emotions. So there's a disconnect between what you think they know versus what they actually know, right? So the question that I want you to always ask when you're giving a presentation, whether it's your job talk or a conference talk, is how clear are you actually being, right? How much does your audience actually understand? And then when you couple that with sort of the fundamental attribution error, which is sort of attributing other people's actions to internal factors and sort of your own actions to external factors, right? Together, they're going to be sort of the bases for how you're going to design your presentation, right? So basically, you are never going to be in a room where everyone is an expert in your subject. Never, right? I'm a corporate governance scholar. MSU has a very strong corporate governance, like strategy faculty, but not every single one of those faculty members is an expert in my area. And there are many others, we're a mixed OB strategy department who have no idea what corporate governance is, right? No one's going to be a complete expert. And even if they are an expert, even if they're sort of an eminent scholar there, they're not going to know everything about your particular topic, right? You're not a carbon copy of other people, right? So there's some value add, there's some new thing that you're bringing that people might not know. Now, if you treat people, however, like they are an expert, they will feel confused, lost, and worst case scenario, stupid. You do not want your audience to feel confused, lost, and definitely not stupid, because with the fundamental attribution error, they will blame you for making them feel that way. These are people who have gotten PhDs, right? These are people, especially senior people, right, who are experts in their field. They like feeling smart. They got lots of accolades and lots of support, right? Lots of people telling them that you're smart. And then if you come in and you start giving a talk and you make them feel stupid, they're not going to like it, right? That's a very uncomfortable feeling. So again, when you're thinking about presentations, think about, how can I make this clear? How can I make this simpler, right? People try to confuse complexity for making them feel smart. And yeah, if you use big words, right? If you put like a lot of flashy things on there, you might feel really, really smart. But the trade-off is that you increase the risk of your audience feeling stupid. And because it's your audience who's going to be making these decisions, right? It's your audience who's going to choose whether or not you get this job. You don't want them feeling that way, right? You do not want them feeling stupid. Now, here are some things just in the general slide design, right? How you put together a presentation that could potentially make it easier to be simpler and clear, right? So two important things to keep in mind. Images, pictures are fast, right? Words are slow. What this means is when you're thinking about images, when you see an image, it's very clear, right? You sort of get it immediately. Now, I'm sure we've seen some variation of this, right? Where they're like, some topic, here's all the information listed, right? So brokers are better because of blah, 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 blah. You put together a list like this, I bet like the vast majority of you guys aren't even listening to me right now. You're reading, right? You're reading. I put words on the page, your eyes are going to go instantly to the words and you're going to be reading. Now you contrast this with this, right? Boom, same exact information, right? But sort of captured in picture form. So people sort of, and especially if you choose the right images, right? That's going to evoke very, very quick understanding. And then this is especially powerful when you just want to get a point across, right? It's like, this is the lit review. This is the background. This is sort of like the overall picture. Now I can explain this using a lot of words, but basically you get the general idea that there's someone in the middle, right? Who's part of two groups. We've all seen Venn diagrams before, right? We all understand what happens when there's someone in the middle, right? Versus someone sort of on the periphery. That gets your point across very, very clearly, right? So I would highly encourage you all to tap into images when you want to make a very fast point. Use images to quickly make that point, right? Brokers have these benefits, right? Pro-social behavior has these kind of benefits, boom, right? And then it very quickly, within 30 seconds, you'll be able to sort of have your audience on the same page and then be able to move on that way. Now, the opposite of that, the converse of images being fast, is that words are slow. We've definitely seen things like this, slides like this, right? Discussion conclusion, boom, wow, text. I bet your eyes are glazing over right now. You're reading, you're like, okay, what's going on? What's going on? She's not talking about it. I put this on. Oh my gosh, everyone has just like fallen into a coma, right? Just completely overwhelmed. Too much information, right? These are the behavioral limitations of putting too many words. In contrast, right? If you understand that words are slow, that when you put words on a page, people are going to read it and not listen to you, then you can spoon feed this information, right? Focus on one thing. I'm going to be talking about an external shock, and here are some of the key things that you should realize or that I want to emphasize when I'm talking about external shock. here's sort of the second point of that argument, right? And then it's like, they are not reading ahead of you, they're not following behind you, right? If you match your words to what's being written on the page, then they can follow along while also acknowledging that you're giving that information, right? So you just go on, and it's the exact same sort of information that was on the wall of text from before, but it's a lot easier for your audience to comprehend, right? Think about that analogy, right? If you have a fire hose and it's just spewing water in your face, right? Very uncomfortable experience, not great. Audiences don't like that. Very easy for them to be confused, very easy for them to feel stupid. In contrast, if you're feeding them these bites of information, right, slowly and sort of allowing them time to digest, it's a lot easier for them to sort of follow along and comprehend. All right, now, words are slow, so you have to spoon feed your audience so they get the right information at the right time. When you're dealing with an audience of academics, it's often sort of they're zipping off into different directions, right? It's like herding cats. You want to be as contained and as controlled as possible so that everyone's sort of marching along at the pace that you set. I also highly recommend using color and formatting to underscore important points, right? Again, this is when you're tapping into the images part, right? You're tapping into the analytic part of your brain where you spot these differences. If I put something red, if I put something underlined, italicized, your brain is naturally going to focus on the words that are different, right? And this is one way to make sure that they understand your point, that the key thing, the key idea that you're offering them is going to be one that they recognize and potentially remember going forward. Now, important caveats. Pictures with words are not images, okay? They will slow you down. So if you put a picture up there, but it has captions or it has different, people talking to each other or something, that's not an image. That becomes words. It slows you down, right? So don't think that it's going to sort of have that quick response that you're looking for. Figures are not images, right? Yes, it's a JPEG that you sort of plotted there. Yes, maybe you worked it in PowerPoint and you saved it as a picture. No, this is not a picture, right? This is a figure with lots and lots of words. So if you put that there, don't treat them as an image, treat them as words, spoon feed them. So here, in the first stage of my model, I'm going to be talking about some of these contextual influences, blah, 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 blah. Now I'm going to talk about the characteristics of work, blah, 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 right? Then I'm going to talk about the mediating. You get it, right? So this idea of, again, you have this giant thing, you put that on a screen, the first response from your audience is like, whoa, right? Second one is like, no. The third one is like, this person needs to go. Okay. So you want to avoid that trifecta of terrible, right? You want to avoid your audience sort of disconnecting and disengaging. So spoon feed them. Don't scare them. Spoon feed them. Okay. Similarly, graphs are not images, right? We think that they are because, oh, look, lines, no words, all that kind of stuff. No, graphs can be a very, very tough thing for people to present, but it's a really untapped opportunity, right? So do not treat them as images, treat them as words, treat them in the same way that you treat words where you spoon feed them. Always have a title on your graph, right? Telling them what they're about to see. Always have a legend telling them what the things are going to come in, right? So this is, again, setting sort of the foundation of comprehension. Always explain to them what the x-axis is, right? X-axis is years. Y-axis is whatever sort of your dependent variable is. What does it represent? Explain that before you even show any of the bars or anything, right? Get the foundations, title, legend, x-axis, y-axis, right? Then you're like, okay, what am I about to see? Now, what you show them in a graph is going to be dependent on the story that you want to tell. So for example, this was the original image, right? Line graphs, something about profits and cash flow, 5-year moving average, right? Now, there are two potential different stories that you can tell. One can be a before and after, right? Before 1950 or 1970, right? Here's sort of what those 4 lines looked like. After, right? Look at these differences, right? Look at how one increased really, really quickly, one didn't. So before and after. Different story. Comparing one trend to another. If you just look at the 5-year moving average, right, it looks like this. However, if you look at them individually, right, whatever, profits, cash flow, then you see a completely different result. That's a completely different story than before and after. I can't tell you which one to choose because I don't know what your data is and I don't know what your job talk is going to be on, but you do, right? You know what point you want to make with this graph. And I would highly encourage you all to, when you're spoon feeding again that information, to choose what information to present first and what information to present second, to again tell that story. By now, your audience understands what you're saying because of the title. They understand what they're looking at because of the legend. They understand sort of like the independent variable versus sort of dependent variable. Now they want to know your story. Okay, so before I go into sort of the quote unquote art of presenting some of the assumptions, I just want to quickly pause to see if there are any questions. Again, these are sort of the things you should keep in mind while you're making your presentation, right? Both in terms of how your audience is going to respond to you, as well as the actual content of your presentation and how it can be communicated more effectively. All right. Okay, so when we're talking about the art of presenting, here are some common assumptions that I think that oftentimes PhD students and even junior faculty, even senior faculty, right? They think what a talk is supposed to do. And I just want to make this clear for people who haven't heard this phrase before. Do not assume, don't just assume, because it makes an ass out of you and me. And again, because academics think they're so smart, right? They're just going to think it makes an ass out of you. So here are the 4 assumptions, right, that make an ass out of yourself. You think your job talk is just your job market paper in PowerPoint form. You literally take your paragraphs from your paper and you plot them into like PowerPoint, and you're like, ta-ta, I'm done, right? First assumption. Second, you assume that everyone has read your job market paper. Third, you assume that everyone understands your job market paper. And the last one is the worst assumption. You assume that everyone is super interested in your job market paper. You're like, this is the best thing anyone's ever written. This is life transformative. Everyone's going to love it. All this, completely false, completely false, right? I understand that in certain disciplines, so like sociology, I've seen it, psychology, I've seen it, there are people who just sort of stand behind the podium and they literally read their job market paper, right? Vast majority of us are in management. That's not going to fly, okay? That's going to make people be like, they don't understand our norms. They don't understand what we do here. They're not going to be able to stand in front of our undergrads or our MBA students or our MBA students and be an effective teacher, right? Insta cross off. Right, so it is not. This is the worst assumption to make, that you can just literally translate your job market paper paragraph to paragraph into slide form. I can guarantee, as faculty, definitely not everyone has read your job market paper. Probably the committee that has been reviewing your package has read your job market paper, but definitely not everyone. Right? We sort of just show up 15 minutes before and we're like, oh, here's a job candidate. All right, let's see what they have. And because of that, right, they don't understand it. They have no idea, right? Maybe they did read your job market paper, but you're a strategy person, they're an OB student or OB faculty and vice versa, right? There's no guarantee that they understand it. And definitely, no one cares about your job market paper as much as you do, right? No one does. And like the level of interest that they have, especially when they've flown out other candidates, is very, very low. So when you're thinking about the audience and trying to see like, are they going to be a friendly audience, whatever, just assume that they're bored. Just assume that this is time out of their day. They're hungry. They don't want to like spend an hour and a half feeling stupid, right? They're just not going to be super receptive there. So don't make these 4 assumptions. All of this is very, very wrong, right? Don't do this. Now, here's what, again, this is my opinion, right? What my opinion of what it should be. Now, I'm only going to be talking about job talks today, but in general for presentations, especially in academia. So conference presentations, teaching presentations, right? Job talk presentations. I like to think of it as a trifecta, right? Where the one intent behind presenting is to educate your audience. There's a second component that's having a conversation. And in my opinion, the most important part for a job talk, telling a story, okay? Oftentimes when you're thinking about educating your audience, you're thinking about teaching. You're standing in front of a classroom and you're telling students, oh, here are Porter's 5 forces, right? Here are sort of the leadership qualities. Here are some like biases that can hinder your leadership potential, stuff like that. Now, aside from teaching, the most experience that we have is sort of conference presentations. You go to AOM, you have 10 to 12 minutes. You go to SMS, you have like 5 minutes, right? So for situations and contexts like that, the most important part of presenting is educating your audience. Now, people assume that job talks are all about educating your audience. I have created this amazing concept. Now I'll educate you about what all of this is about. No, it's not, right? People aren't coming into your job talk and being like, oh, I want to learn more about this particular issue, right? That requires a lot more time and sort of attention. And again, they're expert in a certain domain. We know how siloed academia is. They might be interested in, right? But they're not going there like, can they get my notepad and like take down all these notes? No, that's not their intention. Instead, you go into a job talk and you sort of want to hear a story, right? You want to like, yeah, hear about something new, but it's like NPR or like a TED talk as opposed to going into a classroom and sort of learning that, right? So it's all about that story. What is going on? Because we all understand stories. And now having a conversation, I'm not sure if I'll have enough time to get through this, but that's all about, that's a key component for job talk Q&A, right? So I'm going to return to this in a little bit. So again, if you've blacked out and forgot everything that I said in the last 5 minutes, please remember this slide. This is your job talk is not about reciting your paper. It's not about translating your paper into PowerPoint form, word for word, paragraph for paragraph. It's about telling a story. It is okay for there to be a disconnect between what you're presenting versus what's written in your paper, right? Not a complete disconnect, right? Don't be like, oh, my paper was on, Porter's 5 Forces, but my presentation is on, leadership. No, okay. I'm testing you not to be stupid, right? Some disconnect is fine, right? But there has to be that kind of overlap. And do not make that mistake again of just treating it as a paper and treating it sort of as a lecture for your audience. Now, here's what I would recommend in terms of thinking about your job talk, right? How is it that you can frame it to be more story-like as opposed to paper-like, okay? So we're going to start with this idea of a job talk in 4 acts. Now, I assume everyone here has read a book before, right? Like you know a fairy tale, you know about Cinderella, right? You've watched a movie. You've done something, right? Where there's a beginning, middle, and an end. And you've been like, this is a good story, right? You've read Harry Potter, where the boy underneath the stairwell, right? Oh, he's a wizard, right? Oh, he's defeated Voldemort, spoiler alert, right? So like, you understand this trajectory. You understand what makes a good story. That's the same kind of mentality that I recommend you have when you're doing that job talk, right? Of having that beginning, middle, and end. What I mean is, in the beginning, you need to very quickly establish who you are and why you and the audience are here, right? Set the stage, introduce the characters. Again, Harry Potter, the boy who lived, right? Living under the stairwell, things like that. Then very quickly, right? This is the heart of your talk. What is the solution to what you're presenting? There's a problem here, right? He's being abused by his aunt and uncle, right? But he's a wizard, right? There's something there. There's a problem, and here's the solution that you're offering to solve it. Again, heart of the talk. Then from there, sort of like the rest of the series, how does he do this? How does he defeat Voldemort? How does he triumph over all of these things, right? What do you find? And then finally, sort of the takeaways. Good triumphs over evil, right? Naming people after naming apparently isn't super important in 20 years because it's just like a mouthful of names, things like that. Okay, so let's start with the beginning. Who are you and why are we here? The 2 sort of common questions that I get from, and I've noticed PhD students struggle with during their practice job talks, is how much time do you spend introducing yourself versus how much time do you spend introducing the paper, right? The ego versus the other subset of the ego, right? So like you're who you are versus what you spent 5-6 years, trying to create. So it's a challenge. I understand that. Now, what I want to emphasize, my personal opinion, right, is that Act 1, the beginning part of your job talk, about justifying why people should care about you, right? There has to be some element of you there. And I've seen this presented in a couple of ways, right? So your introductions, you can be like, here's who I am, right? I have my broad thing as like an OT strategy person. I'm really interested in corporate governance as a context, and my contribution as a scholar is specifically about board design, which is blah, 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 right? So again, trying to frame broad, being like, hey, this is how I broadly fit into your department, right? Here's sort of something that makes me special, and here's my unique idea that I think is really, really cool, right? And that's going to get me tenure, something like that. I've also seen people share sort of their papers in progress, right? Look at my work. Look how amazing my productivity is. Look at my pipeline, right? Things like that. That can also work as well. But ultimately, what I find the most effective, right, in terms of hooking your audience and capturing their attention, is to talk about your talk, right? Yes, they like you, they know you, right? But they really want to be like, why am I here? Why did I give up spending time in my office alone listening to Pink, right? And like and have to like spend time here in this sterile like giant auditorium kind of thing, right? And it's about your talk. Your talk is going to be the soul of it. You're not spending 60 to 90 minutes talking about yourself, right? That's the wrong. So this is literally the first slide of my presentation, right? My title of like here's the title of my slide. Here's who I am, blah blah blah, and then I immediately go into my research question. Right, this is literally the second slide of my presentation. I'm like, we are here today because I'm asking two important questions. Why do some boards blah, blah, blah? What factors do you think help or hinder? You know? And that sets the stage immediately where you're like, this is who I am. This is my name. Here's how to pronounce my last name. Here's what school I came from, right? And here's why I'm standing in front of you today, right? These two questions. And if you're able to do this, right, and you can play around with it again, right? But establishing that, you ultimately need to insert that sense of urgency, right? Why is this topic so friggin' important, right? Why do you care about it? Because if you can communicate why you care about it to the audience, then they'll start caring about it as well, right? The first 5 to 10 minutes is so crucial to getting them to care about this topic. Because if they care about this topic, then they're invested in you. They're going to be more willing to listen to you during the presentation. And they're not going to feel confused or stupid, okay? So some common examples of why things are important, right? There's a crisis, right? The world is on fire. Businesses are like, like on the brink of bankruptcy, right? Disaster. There's money. There's a lot of money at stake, right? If you just like, if we don't deal with this issue, then corporations and society, we're going to lose lots and lots of money, right? There's like, and especially in recent times, right? There's been a huge emphasis on social inequality, right? Like this is not fair. There are sort of like major discrepancies, sources of discrimination that's going on right now. And this is a bad thing. Normatively, this is a bad thing. And also socially, et cetera, right? So these are things like broader themes that you can draw on to justify why it's so important for them to care. So again, I don't want to say which one is better or which one is worse. Like ultimately it comes down to what fits into your narrative, what fits into your thing, right? Now, oftentimes like the question here, right, they're like, Shelby, I don't think my stuff is that interesting. Or I don't think it's that important. And at this point, I'm just like, not with that kind of attitude, okay? If you go in, you're just like, I don't know. I think it's not about this kind of stuff. I don't think people care. That is a terrible attitude. That is a loser attitude, right? You can't do that. The first person to believe that this is important has to be yourself. So you need to be like, this, pardon my language, this shit is amazing, right? I am the most brilliant person ever. Pump yourself up a little bit, right? Because if you aren't a true believer in your research, that your audience is not going to be convinced about that, okay? So really spend the time making sure that you get that hook correct. All right, now, second part, right? You've established who you are. More importantly, you've established your topic and why they're there. Now, what's the solution you're presenting? So Act 2 is about presenting your proposed solution and why it's important, right? You said there's a problem. There's a problem in the world that my research is attempting to address it, right? But you can't just hold a problem because then that just makes the audience, if they believe in you, right, be really upset. Oh no, there's disaster. Oh no, we're losing money. Oh no, we're terribly losing. That's not a good state for them to be in, right? That's the conflict. They're unresolved. Your solution is going to help them resolve it, right? So in my job talk, I said, here are some of the assumptions that we're making. And these assumptions are incorrect. These are very bad assumptions, right? Because we have this problem, right? Of blah, 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 blah. And here is the solution that I'm offering, blah, 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 right? So it's again, it's not meant to be very subtle, right? Finessing in that way, right? No, be very clear. Here's the problem solution that we're dealing with. Here's why it's really important. And here's the solution that I think is gonna help. This is the heart of your talk, okay? This is what's gonna make or break your talk, because we can talk about ourselves, that's no problem. We understand the research question, right? We can set it. But that solution, once you get people agitated, once you get people invested, right? And why this is important, you need to provide them a viable solution to help calm those fears, right? To be like, oh, there is hope for Harry Potter, right? He's not going to just wind up back underneath the stairwell, right? He has some way to combat Voldemort, right? You need to give them that magic wand, right? Where you're like, this is going to address it. This is going to solve some of these things. Now, at this point, I've been really framing this presentation in terms of being phenomenon driven. This can be methods driven as well, right? So like we have this major issue in terms of understanding understanding or measurement for social class, right? For understanding or measurement for compensation, things like that. I am offering a solution to that. This is something that people have never considered before. And it's important because of X, Y, and Z, right? So this can be adapted for phenomena, for theory, for empirics, right? But ultimately, problem, solution, right? This is going to be the core of your talk. This is what's going to get your audience on your side to make sure that they're following you through. Now, Act 3 and 4 should just naturally flow from that. If you've done a good job in terms of setting up the front end, right, then everything else should just be like easy peasy going forward. Not to say that they're just going to let you skate. Some departments save all the harshest and most like probing questions for the latter half, right? But again, if they understand what you're trying to address and how you're trying to address it, it's going to be relatively straightforward. So Act 3, right, the methods results section, is about presenting that and why it's super interesting, sophisticated, and important, right? So it could be this idea of like, your data is so sick, right? Proprietary data, things that people haven't ever seen before, right? Oh, it covers like a much more expansive like data time frame than it was before. Something about it, right? So find something to brag about your data. When you're presenting sort of like your independent variables, dependent variables, right? Try to find some way to make it a little bit easier for them to understand, right? When I talk about post-restatement period, I know that people are confused about that. So I've used visuals to sort of cue them, right? So it's like a pendulum swings only when there's a shock, something like that, right? Again, you don't want your audience to be confused about what you're arguing. So remind them, find simpler, clever, more creative ways to describe that. And also make sure that any kind of lingering assumption that you get, or like questions that you've received during your practice talks, that they're blatantly addressed here, right? At this point, you've hopefully practiced a little bit. You have a sense of some of the points where people can wander off, right, or get confused. Address it right now, so even before they ask that question. All right. You throw in some statistical like this. I don't know how useful that's going to be, right? But like, sometimes people really want to see the model. I find, as my personal bias, that visuals are clearer for me, right? So if you're talking about something, you're talking about a difference, show that difference. This is what the ideal, like this is our hypothesized trend line. This is what we should expect to see when we plot our interactions, right? Our data. And this, like, again, helps you get people to visually understand what's going on, right? Very quickly, and have it sort of stick in their mind more than words can. Now, when you're giving the results, here's what I highly recommend. I've been to way too many presentations, right, where they stick some giant like regression table on there and it's tiny, right? And I'm just like, yo, I have terrible eyesight. You're making me feel really bad about my eyesight right now. And that makes me feel really bad about you, right? Don't do that. You can put it on there and be like, yes, I have a whole regression table. Woohoo, it's real, right? But be like, I'm going to zoom in on it later. Don't just leave this on and expect your audience to be able to see this. That's not going to work. As a side note, in general, having size, I think they say like 32 font as sort of your smallest font is probably a good key to have, right? Make your text big. You don't have to show everything, just show the important bits, right? So show the whole table, but like acknowledge that you're not going to go into it. And then also remind them what the hypothesis is supposed to be. Because like they might generally understand, but like you have to like remind them of some of the key features as, again, you're spoon feeding them. Then, right, you'd be like, I have the whole table as a reminder. What we're looking for is this. Here are the specific results. So zoom in on the specific results that are going to match that hypothesis, right? Show specifically, right, the interaction term, or like, the variable of interest, the p-value, the like, all that kind of stuff, right? This is when you zoom in and you're like, yes, I know that it was hard to see. Don't worry, we can all see this now, right? And then mimicking what you had on the previous slide, then show the results, right? Be like, yes, in support of H1, what we find is doing A leads to B, right? It's great because we want B to happen. And so again, using what we had talked about during the behavioral parts of a presentation to really underscore why your findings are so cool and so important, okay? And here's sort of a place where I see a lot of talk sort of miss a viable opportunity. What are the takeaways? Act 4, the final act, the concluding act, is about summarizing your talk and, most importantly, impressing your audience one last time, right? So oftentimes you see just like, again, those like words in the place, discussion and conclusion, right? Blah, 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 wall text. People are like, okay, this is boring, right? We'll sort of zip through it. This does not inspire like glory, right? This does not impress anyone. This is a wall of text. People are tired. They're like, oh, okay, we're almost at the end. Can I make the lunch special, right? Like, that's what it's inspiring. People are bored. You're not listening to me right now because you're reading this, but you're bored. Don't do this. Okay, so here's a tactic that I use for my contributions, and I'm very grateful for Senior Scholar for introducing this to me. Right, so there's a 3-part framework. I'm saying here is what in my first contribution is response to reputation threats. Right, that's this is what prior work said. This is what I'm arguing. Right, that was a problem. This is the this is what I'm arguing. This is the solution, and here's what I found. Right, this is my contribution where you have blah 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 blah. And then you start, my second contribution is about board monitoring, right? Here's what prior research did and the problem that they did. In the middle, here's my solution, right? Here's how I'm addressing it. And ultimately, here's my contribution and going forward, right? If you don't have time to walk through these individually, throwing them on just as an ending slide so people can sort of see it in a much more clear kind of layout, it's going to be very powerful. Much better than a wall of text. No one wants to read a wall of text, right? But they're like, oh, cool columns. Oh my God, arrows, right? Something like that. Like, you don't have to copy this exact formatting, but something like that to really condense what you're saying, right, into very manageable buckets is going to be very, very helpful. Okay, final thing I'm going to say about the art of presenting, right, is this idea of a money slide, right? This is trademark Shelby Gai in 2023, money slides. What's a money slide? A money slide is a slide that you spend the most amount of time on, right? This is a slide that you're like, oh, I'm going to milk it for all it's worth, right? This is not a slide that has like a bunch of pictures on it that you're sort of zipping through. This is a slide that you're like, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to have some like really awesome words on this. I'm going to deliver it with so much panache, right? And excitement and drama, right? And I recommend that you limit 1 per act. What this means is you have these 4 acts, right? Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, who you are, what your solution, blah, blah, blah. The money slide for your who you are and why you're here for Act 1 is here's the problem. Okay, it is not who I am, right? It's not, oh, look at this background. Look at all the prior work. No, the money slide in Act 1 is what is the problem? Why are we here? Why should we care about this? Right? And again, this can be a variety of encompass a variety of approaches. Prior research is wrong. Prior research is incomplete. Prior research is limited, stupid, whatever. Right? They've never considered this. Right? There's something that you have to problematize this issue. Right? This is why you care. This is why they should care as well. Right? 1 slide should really milk that to get that in. Right? So people understand. When you're doing the solution, the money slide is here's my solution. I've already done all this setup and explaining what the problem is. Here's my solution. Here's why you should listen to me, right? Here's why I'm so smart, because I came up with something that you didn't think about before, right? The key to unlock all these mysteries. And so it could be new theory, it could be a new combination of theories, it could be a new setting, it could be a new method. I don't know, world's your oyster, right? Again, like depending on your research and sort of what your talk is, what your paper is about, this is what's going to be. But again, problem solution. The heart of the talk is centered around these 2 issues. These are the most basic things that you need to get right. That if anyone just sort of like blacks out afterwards, right, and then walk out, what was the talk about? What did they offer? Right? They have to be able to answer this. So make it clear, make it concise, make it that money slide where you spend a lot of time. Now, for the other acts, fairly straightforward, right? What you're testing, what's your solution? How are you testing your solution? Here's my approach and the cool results, right? I've used a cool method. I've used cool data, right? There's some really cool robustness checks, right? All of these kind of things, right? Something that you can be like, yes, it's not your standard like OS using like typical public data, right? And we found it, right? No, there has to be something sort of exciting and sort of juicy there, right? And find the most exciting thing and sort of emphasize that. My opinion, it's not going to be as important as the previous 2 money slides, but it's still worth considering that there's some arc, right, in Act 3, something that you're like, this is important, and you should try to remember this. And again, with the takeaways, with that contribution, that final impression, that final opportunity for you to make a good positive impression, look at my amazing contributions. Theoretical importance, right? Practical importance. That are just going to save billions of dollars, right? I'm going to be the next Michael Porter in terms of my theorizing, all this kind of stuff, right? Something like that, so that they know that they glean something from the presentation. Okay. All right. Final tips. I know that was a lot of information. So again, I'm gonna send you this PDF and I'll have the video recorded, right? But taking a deep breath, final tips to keep in mind. How to handle your audience, how to minimize the things that make you look stupid, right? And how to stay true to yourself. Okay, so a lot of questions like during the registration about how is it that you handle your audience. Now, remember the trifecta, the presentation trifecta, right? So the idea is that you're not trying to necessarily educate your audience, but especially during the job talk, highly emphasize the idea that you're telling your audience a story. Now, when you're dealing with Q&A, you're not going to be telling them a story. What do you mean by this contract? Well, let me tell you about Harry Potter, right? And he was underneath the stair. No, right? No one wants to hear this long-winded, context-driven thing, right? No, right? They want you to answer the question. So the job talk Q&A, though, right, is about having this kind of conversation. It's not, I don't want you to imagine sort of an adversarial thing of like, they are the enemy. They want to kill me. They want to kill my idea. Right? I'm so scared. I'm going to fight back. No, none of that. We're having a conversation. Someone has expressed interest in something that I think is really cool, right? I don't want to scare them off. I don't want to come on too strong. I just want them to understand and sort of engage in that way, right? So main points for how to handle your audience. Again, goes back to the beginning. Do not make them feel stupid or confused, right? Oh, how do you measure this? Were you not listening to me? Right? As I said in my previous slide, right? It's about this. No, don't do that. Right? That's going to go downhill real bad and people are going to be very, very upset at you. So don't make them feel stupid. No, great question. Right? I'm so glad you asked that, right? Oh, this is such a great opportunity for me to underscore some of these things, right? Something like that. Very different kind of framing, very different way of making your audience feel engaged with your talk. And one of the things that will help you not be so aggressive, right? Or like so dismissive is that you do not treat them like the enemy, especially when they're asking you questions. Now, I understand that questions can be scary, right? I understand that some questions can sort of seem mean, right? You're like, oh no, what are they doing? Are they trying to dismantle my talk? They're attacking my baby. Oh no, my precious, they have to defend it, right? So you treat them as the enemy. You try to be like, no, everything is perfect, right? Your question like doesn't do anything. And you come off as very defensive, you come off as very distant, and you come off as just not confident in what you're talking about, right? When they're asking questions, I want you to reframe it and be like, oh my God, this is so great. Someone wants you to talk more about this issue, which I think is great. They want me to talk about my baby's foot, and my baby's foot is so cute, right? Yes, thank you for asking me a question about my baby's foot. I would love to talk more about it, right? That's the thing, right? They're giving you an overture. They're extending a handout, giving you an opportunity to talk more about something that you might not have been able to talk about before, right? Treat it as an opportunity. Don't treat it as a threat. Don't come off as defensive. Don't come off as like you want to fight them, right? Because that's one way to really alienate your audience. And again, if you assume that they're well-intentioned, right, and likely they are well-intentioned when they're asking this question, and then you come off and like you're like super aggressive in this way, you're gonna make them feel stupid. You're gonna make them feel very confused, right? And you're gonna lose them, right? Treat them as a friend. Treat them nicely. That being said, some people are just mean. Some people are just like they delight in being mean and asking rude questions and trying to tank your talk. These people exist. I don't know why, but they exist, right? So the best point of advice I can give for you here is do not reciprocate. Right. So they talk about Ronald Reagan being the Teflon man, right? They sling stuff at him and it just like all just wipes off, right? He's not affected by it at all. He's calm, he's collected. It doesn't matter what you say, right? If that's in 1760, that kind of thing, right? Do not engage. When they get mad at you, you need to keep that smile on, right? Keep professional and respond as if they asked you the nicest thing possible. I used to joke that grouchy old men are sort of like my favorite type of person, not even audience member or academic, right? Just like person to interact with, right? Because they come out and they're like grouchy, right? They're like, oh, everything hurts, you know nothing because you're young and a woman, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, I reciprocate because I'm happy. And yes, I'm young, but that gives me, my optimism. And I can engage. And then you know what? Eventually that sort of bleeds out. And because they're old, they're like, oh, wow. This is so great, right? This is positive energy that's sort of consuming more. That's sort of the mentality that you have to have when you're going to these job talks. I have been to job talks where people are very supportive. I've been to job talks or people were just like, like had a reputation, right, for being like sharper elbowed. Same reaction, right? Thank you for asking that question. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to explain, right? I'm so glad we can talk about this some more. Do not engage. Do not let them drag you down to that level, because that's just, they have lots of practice being mean. I hope you don't have lots of practice being mean, right? So don't let that sort of tar you up. Don't let that ruffle you. And sometimes if they're hell bent on being like that, I mean, like, I'm happy to discuss this even more. I just want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about the rest of it and sort of sidestep that and try to go on as much as possible. I don't guarantee that this will always work. I don't guarantee that you're going to feel good. I felt really bad during some of those talks, right? But at the very least, you're just like, I at least I'm proud of how I behaved, right? I am proud of how I handled those questions. And even if they didn't like it, I did my best, right? So these are sort of the 3 things I would highly recommend. Now, that being said, you can't control your audience. You can't control if they're mean to you. You can't control if the fire alarm goes off in the middle of your talk. You can't control if the computer shuts down, right? You can't control if your clicker doesn't work. All things that have happened to me and my friends during talks, right? Can't control all these things. But there are certain things that you can control, right? So do not have typos in your presentation. Right. Some people are like have asked questions of Shelby, what if I like include like a specific like school name, right? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's fine. But make sure you switch it out, right, before you go to the next talk or something, right? Don't make these like small mistakes, because they're gonna now in and they're gonna be like, oh, they had so much time to prepare, and yet we're seeing this. Don't do it. Okay. You have some control over images not showing up. You will inevitably have half an hour before your job talk. Right. And I've seen job candidates just like sit there and sort of like twiddle their thumbs, and they go up and all of a sudden a picture doesn't appear. And you're like, WTF, you had half an hour to make sure that this wouldn't be an issue. And yet you're seeing this, right? This is a lack of preparedness. You look stupid, right? Don't do that. Always test out your stuff. And I would also highly recommend having a PowerPoint version of it as well as a PDF version of it, right? Because you just never know. So you have to make sure that both formats are going to work with your talk. So many times, sound and video not working, right? And there's nothing that makes you feel worse than being like, why isn't this sound playing? Oh no, where did the video go? Right? You look like you just look like a Luddite in front of these people. And this is not the kind of impression that you want to leave. Animations. So slide zooming in, slide disappearing out, right? Slide switching it. Don't do it, right? People in middle school don't do this in the US, right? Slides just appear, just make them appear. And if you're using animations to be like, oh, when you cross this and this, right? It's not great, but like, okay, sure, right? If you really think an animation is going to add that, but don't think that because you've animated something that all of a sudden you're Disney. You're not Disney, right? It's not going to look as cool as you think it does. So save the time in terms of your actual presentation as opposed to making something appear in a cool way. This is my personal opinion, of course, but like, I feel very strongly about this. And the final thing that I want to emphasize is this idea of cute images. So one of the, and by this I mean, a thank you slide, right, with like a cute character, or thank you with like a cute font or something like that. And this is especially important for women to keep abreast of, right? So we know that there are certain stereotypes associated with Asians. There's a reason why we in ABBA want to provide these kinds of professional development workshops, right, and tips like this, right? Because there are certain considerations that we as a community are confronting that other groups might not have to deal with, and there are certain things that we as women, as female academics, have to deal with that certain male academics don't have to deal with either, right? Playing into stereotypes of being cute, right, having a little bunny, things like that. That's just not going to help you seem professional in front of your colleagues, right? So one of the most direct but also most useful feedback that I got as a second year, having put something cute as my ending slide, right, was don't do that, right? You're oftentimes going to be entering into a department where you might be the only minority, right, of racial, gender, whatever, right? So even though you might do certain things to stand out, like present an awesome job talk, right? You don't want it to seem like you're not professional, that you can't sort of hang with them in that way, right? So I highly recommend sort of cut the cute, right? Cut the cute. You can be excited, you can be enthusiastic, you can be all these kind of things, right? But ideally, you don't want to be cute, because that's not the idea, well, like a feature that they associate with someone who's come in and like command the classroom that way. And if you have forgotten literally everything that I've said up to now, right? I think the most important thing, honestly, the most important thing when you're going into a job talk is this idea of staying true to yourself. You can only be you, right? If you are someone like me, right, who just like has a lot of hand and facial expressions, who just like has a lot of energy going on, right? Lean into that, right? If you're someone who's like, I can stand here and I will give the best Shakespearean soliloquy you've ever heard in your life, right? I'm like diving into that drama, dive into that seriousness, right? Do that, right? Do not try to pretend that you're someone you're not. Do not try to be like that round peg in a square hole, right? Or vice versa. You can only be yourself. And I can guarantee you, I have tried to just be like very, very, very stoic. I can probably do it if I have a lot of sugar in me, right? And I'm like actively concentrating on it. But it takes so much energy just to pretend to be someone you're not. And that energy can be directed to making your talk more compelling in the way that you feel most compelled giving it, right? You feel power in how you interact. You feel power in how you present, right? That authenticity is something that no presentation, right? No brilliant PowerPoint is ever going to be able to mimic, right? So you can only be you. So be the best you that you can be, right? Do not let someone, do not, I would hate, the worst thing, right, would be you see this presentation, you're like, I need to be like Shelby, right? Obviously, my ego would be super flattered, right? No, but like, honestly, no, I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be like yourself. I want you to be the truest version of yourself possible. Because ultimately, regardless of whether or not you get this job, right, regardless of whether you get that offer, whatever, you want to be sure that there's a matching process between the department you're interviewing with and yourself. If they can't handle your presentation, if there are a bunch of like grouchy people and you're coming in like, right? Even if they give you that offer, you might not be super happy there, right? And it's like, it's a style mismatch potentially, right? Or vice versa. Obviously, I'm not saying that you should, that's an instant reject, right? But it's like, they say that a job talk or a fly out sort of like dating where you have to like, ideally, all things being equal, right? There's a match between what you have to offer and what they want. And so if you go up there and you spend all this mental energy pretending to be someone who you're not, then there's a good chance that if you decide to go there, you're going to spend the next 6, 16, 60 years, whatever, right? Continuing to pretending to be the person who you're not. And that sounds really sucky. That sounds terrible. Not worth it, in my opinion, right? So with that, I just want to say that, here at ABA, we just had a shooting event at Michigan State two days ago, and in the past couple of days, we've really come together as a community to be like, how can we deal with such a tragedy? And it just made me reflect on the genesis of ABA, why we're here today, why the people who join as committee members, and why we're presenting these events. And it really came after a whole bunch of attacks against Asians and Asian Americans, right, in the wave of COVID. ABA is about community. ABA is about support. ABA is making clear that even in the face of tragedy and in the face of hate, right, that we have people here who will support us, who are going to back us up, right, who are going to uplift us in this way. So it's really important for me, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of the other committee members, to emphasize this point. If there's anything that we can do to help you as a community member, right? If you have any questions about presentations, about footwear, right, about any of these things, right, please don't hesitate to ask, because it can be so easy to feel alone in this. It can feel so scary not being part of a community, right? And it can be very demoralizing thinking that you're the only one that's dealing with this issue when it's not the case. Okay, ABA is here for that community. We are here for you. We are here to try to help in whatever way that we can. And if you forget everything else that I said, right, please remember that. Okay. So with that, I know I said a lot. We have 4 minutes left. I'm happy to entertain some questions. But again, if there's anything else that you want clarification on, please send an email. Please feel free to reach out to anyone on the board. Right. We are here for you. Thank you, guys.